A few months after Attorney General Merrick Garland vowed that his department would hold all January 6th perpetrators at any level accountable under law, we're starting to see more indications that the DOJ's investigation is gathering steam. Yesterday, 5 members of the Proud Boys, including its leader, were indicted on seditious conspiracy. It's a charge that, as Rachel pointed out last night, is rarely brought by the Justice Department because it's so difficult to prove. Typically speaking, the department would only bring those cases if they knew they could follow through on them. That followed the indictment of 11 members of the Oath Keepers militia on the same seditious conspiracy charge earlier this year. There are also reports that the DOJ is stepping up its criminal inquiry into another focal point of the plot to overturn the 2020 election: fake electors. These are the Trump supporters in 7 states won by Biden who signed documents sent to Congress and the National Archives claiming to be the real electors in each of those states. And that was an operation that was directed by the Trump campaign. The Washington Post reports that the Justice Department has now issued subpoenas to and conducted interviews with some of those in Georgia who were connected to the scheme, which backs up recent reporting from CNN that federal investigators had interviewed people related to the plot in at least 2 states, Georgia and Michigan. We're also learning new details about the clandestine nature of the scheme. The Post now reports that Trump's election operations director for Georgia sent an email telling the 16 Republicans who signed their names as electors, they were fake electors in that state, to be discreet about it. Quote, "Your duties are imperative to ensure the end result, a win in Georgia for President Trump. But it will be hampered unless we have complete secrecy and discretion," end quote. He also tells them in bold, quote, "Please at no point should you mention anything to do with presidential electors or speak to the media," end quote. Which is kind of weird because this whole thing about elections is supposed to be done out in public. We know for a fact that part of the message went unheeded, or at least that part did, because people did talk. Those fake electors in Georgia allowed a local news station's cameras in to film them as they signed certificates declaring themselves the rightful electors. They now have to worry about their own criminal liability. But what are these new revelations about the campaign's desire for complete secrecy mean for the campaign and those overseeing the plot? What's their liability? Does this come back to bite them? Joining us now is Barbara McQuade. She's the former United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. She is now a professor at the University of Michigan Law School. Barbara, good to see you, my friend. Thank you for taking time to be here tonight, because this is one of those questions that those of us not trained in the law don't know how to think about. Like, what does it mean that there's now more and more connection between the organizers, the fake electors, and even messaging that suggests, shh, don't talk about this out loud?
I think it's a very interesting development, Ellie, and I think it is heartening to see that the Justice Department is looking at this part of the plot, because this is part of the core of what John Eastman was urging Donald Trump and Mike Pence to do. Part of throwing out the real electors required having these alternate slates of electors to vote for Donald Trump, and they needed to be in place before January 6th. The fact that they're done secretly, I think, is especially important. You know, in prosecution circles, we refer to this as consciousness of guilt. If what you're doing is legitimate, then there's no reason to cover it up. But if you do things secretly, it suggests that you know that there's something wrong about it. I could imagine a defense here being, we were just providing provisional ballots. We knew there were some irregularities in the election. And so just in case, we were filling these things out. That might be one defense. But if you have someone saying you have to be secret about it and you can't tell anybody what's going on. In fact, I think they even said you have to do this at the Capitol, but when you arrive, lie and tell them that you're there to see your senator or something, because otherwise they won't let you in. That suggests to me that there is something foul about what's going on here. And it may be that these people who signed these slates, the actual electors, are just sort of pawns in this whole thing, doing what they're told to do. Where I think the Justice Department's investigation really should focus, and likely is focusing, is who gave these directives and why, and keep following that up and up and up to who was the author of this instruction. Does it come all the way back to John Eastman and those who were planning these plans in the Oval Office?
Will that make a difference? If you go higher and higher and higher, and you find out that what many of us guessed to be the case, that this was orchestrated at very high levels, what's the import of making that determination?
Well, I think ultimately, if you could put together all of this, that this was a plot to defraud the American public about the outcome of the election and disrupt the results, disrupt the peaceful transfer of power, then you could charge a crime called conspiracy to defraud the United States. It is essentially using fraudulent intent to prevent the proper functioning of government. And so here the proper functioning of government would be to certify the votes as they were cast across the country. Instead, if there was a plot here to try to get Mike Pence to throw out the legitimate electors and instead use these alternate slates of electors, it would be a way of flipping the outcome of the election illegitimately. So there's a potential crime there if you can put the pieces together.
I want to ask you about the indictment of these 5 Proud Boys on this seditious conspiracy charge. You're one of the rare prosecutors who've actually brought seditious conspiracy charges. What does the DOJ's decision to charge members of the Proud Boys with seditious conspiracy, in addition to the 11 members of the Oath Keepers, what does that tell you?
This is a very serious charge, Ali. They had already been charged with another crime of conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. And that brings with it a 20-year sentence, just like the seditious conspiracy charge. And so in many ways, they could have simply left things as they stand and still facing considerable amount of time. But seditious conspiracy requires proof of something far more serious. It requires the use of force to oppose the authority of the United States government. That's much more than going in and disrupting a government proceeding. Using force to oppose the authority of the United States, it really is the closest thing we have to a charge of treason during times of peace. The treason statute can only be used when we are at war for someone who provides aid and comfort to the enemy. But this one brings with it a connotation of disloyalty to the United States. So it's a very serious crime, but I think it's appropriate in a case where you want to bring the moral condemnation on people who have actually tried to overturn the United States government.
It was a wise decision to ask you these questions, Barbara. Always good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. Barbara McQuade is the former United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. As always, we appreciate your time.